YouTube, what the crap's going on? HeirofCarthage here, back in Total War Warhammer, and you're going to be seeing myself here, leading one Volkmar the Grim and his troops, and teaming up with me is none other than Mr. Appius Rolus, the character named, or one of my viewers who named his YouTube avatar after a character in my West Rome campaign. He also moderates on my channel when I stream, so he's going to be playing as Bordelot. This was actually during the live stream event that I held this last weekend, where it was basically you had to pick a less than legendary lord. Volkmar was amongst them, which Volkmar, in my opinion, he's not like one of the great legendary lords, but I don't really consider him to be like crappy either, but we allowed the pick of him. Appius meant to pick Albrecht, but he accidentally picked a generic Bretonnian lord instead. Albrecht was allowed, just not because, again, when he's on his mount, he's pretty decent, but we allowed the pick of Albrecht just because he's so crappy by comparison to the Fey Enchantress and Leon Kerr. Helman Gorst was allowed. So here's Gorst. You just don't see him used a lot because Vlad and others can provide so much more benefit and be so much a safer pick. And then the other player picked none other than Barfazar Gelt, the patriarch of the Empire, Supreme Patriarch, who looks like he's having trouble negotiating some of these dead trees. Balthasar is actually quite a bit better recently, like not as a character or in fighting or something, but since the Lore of Metal got slightly better, he's slightly better. So yes, that's the case. Now, I think kind of crappy legendary lords like Gorst or Kemmler are actually pretty good in the sense that they get the vampire armies to lead, as opposed to some of the other less than legendary lords may not have such a flexible force around. So I found it easiest to actually play with the crummier vampire lords than I did the crummier lords from some of the other factions. And just to get, like, in the event, you can go back and watch the event. It was the live stream called Less Than Legendary or something like that. It was this last Saturday. Basically, you can go check it out. So let me introduce you to the armies just real quick. I'm going to pause it so that you know the armies before the engagement happens. I've got a Flagellant army, I got a Sigmar's Sons, a Tattersoul, and then 2 standard Flagellants. I have Sterlin's Revenge and one more Free Company militia that's already being attacked by a very well-placed Dire Pack. I did not see these guys ahead of time, so unfortunately that's happening. I have 1 unit of Demigryph Knights with Halberds, and I only went with 1 because I was trying to save money and get a Jade Wizard so that I could make Volkmar much tankier. The army of Appius, he's got 2 Foot Squires, a Lord, 1 Royal Pegasus Knight, and 3 Questing Knights. So a lot of armor-piercing infantry, and then the rest of his... yeah, that's pretty much his whole army, because this was medium funds. The vampire players got really trashy infantry, and I was pretty excited to take on his infantry. It's just skeleton warriors and skeleton spears. They're not any good. And then a couple of zombies, or a zombie. So the vampire army doesn't scare me. It's going to go down fairly easy to my flagellants. There's a couple of concerns. One is the corpse cart, and Gorst on his corpse cart. They will be buffing pretty significantly the stats on these skeleton warriors, making them much better. Now, what does concern me is the Empire player has gone all out here and brought a Reichsguard and 2 Demigryph Knights with Halberds, and then the Vampire player still has a Blood Knight back here. So I'm in big trouble. And there's a Vampire Lord of Shadows, and then you combine that with Balthasar, he can rip the armor off of my Lord or my my own Demigryph Knights. And initially there was a huge mistake here. Both my opponents were pressuring me, and rather than falling back, which I should have done, I took the engagement, and Appius has swung too far over here, and he's just being kited and distracted by the Empire infantry. And all the while, the cavalry, I saw the cavalry, and I mentioned it to Appius, but it was too late. He'd already run his cavalry to the far flank. He swung his Hippogriff Knights back, but I'm about to get horribly overwhelmed. All I have is 1 Demigryph Knight, and you can see it gets hit by Plague of Rust immediately, and just watch it crumble. I couldn't defend my my Free Company militia, so I'm just trying really hard to kill the corpse cart before they get wrecked. And yeah, my Demigryph Knight just falls apart. I used the Scroll of Power, and I tried to get a healing spell cast, but my healing spell failed to cast because my Jade Wizard got hit by Reichsguard. So I get hit hard on this flank, and there's just not enough support to overcome. And the Royal Pegasus Knights, although they tried to give support, it's just too late. So Balthasar actually being quite useful there, and making my Demigryph Knights squishy as a sponge. And now the problem is that Volkmar is trapped amidst all this. I'm going to start running away with my Jade Wizard to try and get away from these units that are coming in behind me. As expected, my Flagellants just absolutely mop the floor with the Skeleton Warriors, and they're already cutting their way through the second line of Vampire Infantry. But again, because neither Corpse Cart died, they are healing combatants, and they are also buffing their stats and their leadership. So, yeah, I've got all of Volkmar's abilities coming off now, and he is tanking out an extraordinary amount of damage, and doing so quite well. And my Jade Wizard, I was just trying to get him away and hide him in the woods. Obviously, my opponent knows where he's at the moment. I used the Scroll of Power ability so that I could get another healing spell off quicker. But you can see the Blood Knights, again, coming out after my Jade Wizard. Fortunately, my Jade Wizard's not on a mount. These Questing Knights, if they were with me, we might have been able to defeat the Demigryph Knights and the Blood Knights with the healing off of my Jade Wizard. Maybe. I mean, it's still a pretty lopsided cavalry fight, so it's hard to be sure. These Questing Knights charge into the Skeleton Spears. Not going to do a whole lot here, and they're being pursued, or no, they're not being pursued at the moment. So they're going to do some damage, but the Skeleton Spears were definitely not our #1 concern. After having destroyed my cavalry, all my Flagellants were rear charged by the enemy cavalry, and so my Flagellant line, which probably could have won the infantry fight, got destroyed by the cavalry too soon. Volkmar, as you can see, though, to his credit, he's extremely tanky. And I was able to tank out all the attacks. They weren't able to kill him. And I'm going to bring him down here and try and attack Barfazar and just do everything I can. But there's probably no hope of turning this battle around at this point. Appius and I made that early mistake. So when you're playing a 2v2 like that and you see that you're going to get overwhelmed, fall back, buy yourself time, and make sure that you're coordinating with your teammate, which I did. I told Appius as soon as I saw it, I was like, hey, they got big-time cavalry in the woods. I was marking it with the little markers, but it was just too late. And we ended up getting in trouble. So I'm going to use, like I said, Volkmar. I'm going to keep putting a beating on Balthasar, who's actually holding out far longer than I would like. Volkmar is definitely better in melee than Balthasar. And I actually start to put a pretty big beat down on this Corpse Cart. It seems like it died even faster. So Volkmar is able to best the Corpse Cart pretty quick. I wasn't able to kill Balthasar, and it doesn't really matter at this point because the Questing Knights got overwhelmed by the Reichsguard and the Demigryph Knights, and they had a Jade Wizard as well. And at this point, when the when the Vampire Lore Shadows came after me, I was pretty happy to actually try and take this fight. Now the Vampiress, she has really good armor at 110, so for a spellcaster, that is fantastic. Volkmar has less armor. And you can see that he's now wavering because of army losses. Not really sure if I could have won that fight or not. I would think so. But yeah, chain route is what it is. So well played to our opponents. And Appius and I learned our lesson here, right? Got to stick together. Have to fight as a team. And then, again, my learning here and my correction would have been to fall back from that early engagement. See how I took the engagement right here on open ground? I was anxious to engage as infantry because I felt good, but what I should have done was they didn't have anything to force me to attack, so I should have fallen back to this forested position on the hill, and it would have made it harder to be outflanked. It would have slowed down the charges of cavalry, and it would have given the Questing Knights perhaps times to turn around and come back towards this fight. But yeah, pulling back definitely would have been the right option, and I had the right terrain to do so, so that is all on me. But it was a fun game. I really enjoyed it nonetheless. Thought that the army pick here by Fran was actually pretty clever. When you bring Balthasar and combine, like, so Reichsguard, for instance, is a good example. In fact, we could go do a quick test just for fun. So if I go to custom battle and I pick the Empire, and let's get Barfazar, put him on his mount, and we will just use, well, we'll bring Transmutation of Lead is actually pretty substantial. It's a huge investment though at 11, but let's just show you, where is it? It's Plague of Rust right here. Yeah, so for only 4 mana cost, you can take 30 armor off, and when you overcast it, it does even more. And you can see there's some other good buffs in here, like this buff right here, Glittering Robe. It's not bad in the right situation, or it can be okay. It's not great. But there's a couple of useful spells now for the Lore of Metal. And one thing I'll say for Balthasar is that this actually does pick him up quite a bit of magic from the reserve, and it can be handy, but it is very expensive at 203, especially when you consider how vulnerable Balthasar is. So that's always like a questionable one. A lot of times, though, I mean, if you don't expect to need a lot of extra armor, see how it says plus 4% armor piercing? For most units, this isn't going to do a whole lot. You would have to have a unit that has, like, even with 100 armor piercing, plus 4% means you're only going to get 4 more armor piercing. And most units don't have anywhere near 100, so to me, this is one of those things that a lot of people be like, no, don't get rid of that. I don't think it really does much. If it rounds up by 1, it might get you that, and then you have this hold the line thing, which you can probably save money on, and then the same thing with stand your ground, and you can still make your Balthasar much cheaper, and yet still get a few spells. Like, you could throw in the Golden Hounds aren't bad, or Searing Doom can be okay in the right scenario too. But let's just go over here and show you what I was talking about. So I played as the Empire as well. And we are going to have to put a Lord in here. And just to make sure that the Lord plays as little a role as possible in melee, we'll put a Balthasar on the other side. And we'll take away all his spells and abilities so that he plays an insignificant role in the melee. And we'll just throw a Demigryph Knights with Halberds in here. And what I'm going to demonstrate is how a Reiksguard, which would normally lose pretty hard to a Demigryph Knights with Halberds, it has 120 armor though, and it doesn't have a lot of armor piercing damage. But when I use the spell to rip off the armor piercing of these enemy Demigryphs, the Reiksguard will all of a sudden perform quite nicely. And I will show you that if I can get the right map, which I believe is .kraz. Yeah, this will work. Let's make sure they didn't screw up my armies. All right, yeah, so I'll just go do a quick test and show you what I'm talking about. So Balthasar can be useful in that sense. I still think he's an extremely risky pick in multiplayer, though, to be honest, in a medium funds battle, he might have opportunities to be useful because he's cheaper and he can ruin an enemy lord so bad, and enemy lords are going to have less support units in a medium funds battle. So I'm not sitting here saying that he's great all of a sudden in a medium funds battle, but I think he would be better in a medium funds battle than he would in a large funds battle for sure. Disagree with me if you want, because I very well could be wrong. It's just my thoughts. I'm going to build up plenty of winds of magic, just kind of sit here for a minute. Let some of my abilities cool down too, so I can show you what the Staff of Volans combined with Arcane Conduit is capable of. At least I hope I can. The battle may be over by then. So the additional Balthasar here definitely can influence the melee some. Let me give you a good example. So that's the other good thing, is that this Plague of Rust, and I'm going to pause it just real quick. The Overcast Plague of Rust lasts for 44 seconds. It's a pretty substantial amount of time. A fight on Warhammer rarely takes that long. So I'm going to show you. I'm going to cast Plague of Rust. So the Demigryphs go all the way down to 65 armor, which is a big deal. They rely on their armor for a lot of protection. The Reiksguard has 62 charge, whereas the Demigryphs with Halberds only 46. So look at this fight. It's otherwise a huge win for the Demigryph Knights, but it can actually be turned around just a little. And if I were to do some additional buffing with Balthasar, for instance, which I could have done sooner, by the way, but I can take away most of the Demigryph Knights' melee attack and take away some of their weapon damage. So they have lower armor, and they're also suffering from a loss of stats, basically. They have no melee attack. So Balthasar can pretty effectively support some units to make them more useful. It's still not going to turn out into wind. If I would have cast the Transmutation of Lead sooner, it may have actually been a victory. We can try that, in fact, here in a moment. But you can kind of see how I get an extended performance out of a unit that would otherwise lose much sooner. Let's try it real quick with doing both at once and see if it actually... No, that's a lot of winds of magic. It is a lot of winds of magic. But again, if you're in a small funds battle, 400 cost savings between the Demigryph and the Reiksguard, and then a cheaper Balthasar, or if you were to use Balthasar, for instance, to lead to the death of an enemy lord much sooner because you take away a ton of his armor and then start peppering him with missiles or hit him with a charge from cavalry, which normally that armor would protect them from, it's a big deal, like I said. So in the right scenario, the Lore of Metal definitely can rob a particular enemy unit of a significant stat boost. Let's just fast forward again, build up our Winds of Magic so that we can cast both spells. I can't remember if there's an overcast on this one. There is. Oh wow, it's an even bigger effect on weapon damage. but it's 16 mana, so it's pretty significant. 11 is much more doable, and then the overcast here is 6. So 6 and 11 is not an out-of-this-world investment to try and take down a key enemy unit. Alright, I'm going to queue up both spells. Alright, so the Demigryph Knights are going to lose pretty much all of their melee attack and their armor. And we'll put it to the test here. Yeah, the Reiksguard's definitely performing better this fight. The Demigryph Knights, though, are still getting some of their charge bonus right now, which is the only reason why they're getting any damage done, because they have 0 melee attack. So after their charge bonus ends, that spell should really affect them even worse, and you can see it is. They're losing quite badly at this point. Now that their melee attack is back, they'll start to pick up quickly, so it still may not be a win for the Reiksguard. Yeah, look at that. The Demigryph Knights still win. Wow. But you guys can see what I was talking about. It definitely makes a difference. If we went head-to-head without any of this stuff, the Demigryph Knights would just straight up slaughter the Reiksguard. The downside here is that the Demigryph Knights can get healed in a real-world scenario too. So yeah, I would say that Balthasar is probably going to be more useful against a Lord or something than he would against a unit like these Demigryph Knights, though it can be handy. You saw my opponent use it in a situation where he made my Demigryph Knights even weaker. How about some Balthasar on Balthasar action here? Look at that, the Balthasar on foot's actually beating me. And I didn't retreat in time. Go! Go, Balthasar! Run for the hills! He can't get out of the fight because his Pegasus is so bad. That's why the Balthasar on foot, even though he was losing armor, was actually winning the fight. That's pathetic. Balthasar is even more pathetic than himself. How do you like that? Oh, Balthasar. Lovable scamp. He's so bad. Can't even beat himself up. There you go, folks. So a little bit of testing with Balthasar. Hope y'all enjoyed the battle. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed playing with my teammate and my opponents, and I know I didn't end up winning the fight with the Reiksguard there, but just showing you kind of what some of the Lore of Metal spells can do. I think that the only other things the Lore of Metal could be actually useful for now, in campaign it's different, right? In campaign you can use Balthasar to get access to huge magic reserves, and you can get all kinds of other buffs that you can't get in multiplayer, which can definitely make Balthasar far more powerful in campaign than he ever would be in multiplayer. There's no arguing that. Searing Doom is a decent spell against blobbed up enemies. It causes magical damage. Glittering Robe, again, it's kind of okay. If you overcast it, it has an effect area. So an extra 30 armor and 8 leadership over an effect area, but it is 14 mana. So yeah, and then Final Transmutation, I've honestly never really discovered a good use for the spell. I haven't tested it a ton. It says causes damage to combatants, strong versus a single combatant. But I've never really seen it be terribly effective versus a single combatant. When you overcast it, it says there's an extended duration at 16 seconds, but it's a huge mana cost. But yeah, the Gehenna's Golden Hounds are actually fairly decent when you overcast it. It's got an extended duration and effect area, and if there's an infantry blob that you can get a hold of with this thing, it's actually pretty decent at causing a considerable amount of damage. But again, it's a lot of magic, so that's why Lore of Metal is not ideal. A lot of magic for effects that probably aren't worth what you pay. But again, in campaign, it's a different story, because you can get a huge magic reserve due to all the special items and retainers and all that other stuff. And then it doesn't matter if you're real efficient for magic, because you can just get a ton of it. And then you can support Balthasar more cost efficiently with like units that you can't afford in multiplayer when you're going through all that. So hope y'all enjoyed it. HeirofCarthage signing out for now. I'll see you next time.